Billionaire mocked the waitress in Chinese, froze when she replied fluently, and exposed him in front of everyone. But what she revealed next destroyed his empire. But before we begin, subscribe now or this might be our last meeting. Follow, comment, and share to stay connected. Don't miss out. Let's dive in. The rain hammered against the windows of the Golden Lotus diner like 1,000 impatient fingers, each drop catching the neon glow of Chinatown's signs and turning the wet pavement into a kaleidoscope of red and gold. Inside, Lena Zhao moved between tables with the kind of precision that came from muscle memory. 3 years of serving overpriced tea and undercooked dumplings had taught her body to navigate the cramped space without thought. She was 28 years old and invisible. The dinner rush was thinning when they walked in, 5 men in suits that cost more than her annual rent, their leather shoes clicking against the linoleum with the confidence of people who'd never been told no. The one in front was tall, mid-30s, with the kind of sharp jawline that belonged on magazine covers and an expression that suggested he knew it. Richard Tan. She'd seen his face on the business section of discarded newspapers often enough to recognize him. "Table for 5, he said to Miguel at the host stand, not quite looking at him. "Somewhere quiet?" Lena's hands tightened imperceptibly around the coffee pot she was holding. Quiet in the Golden Lotus meant the back corner, near the kitchen, where the ventilation was poor and the tables wobbled. But Miguel was already nodding, grabbing menus with the practiced deference of someone who recognized wealth when it walked through the door. She watched them settle in, their conversation a rapid mix of English and Mandarin that rose and fell like a tide. Richard Tan sat at the head, his posture relaxed, but his eyes constantly moving, assessing, calculating. He was the kind of man who made decisions in seconds and never looked back. "Lena, you take them," Sarah hissed, appearing at her elbow with a tray of dirty dishes. "And smile, okay? Big tips." Lena doubted that, but she smoothed her apron and approached the table anyway. "Good evening, gentlemen. Can I start you with tea?" Richard interrupted without glancing up from his phone. "Oolong. And make it hot this time. Last place we went to served it lukewarm like they were trying to poison us." The other men laughed, that particular brand of sycophantic chuckle that rich men's jokes always seemed to inspire. Lena kept her expression neutral, the mask she'd perfected over 3 years of swallowing pride along with her own words. "Of course. I'll have that right out." She turned, but one of the executives called after her in Mandarin. "And some napkins. Real ones, not that recycled garbage." Lena paused for the briefest moment, then continued to the kitchen. She understood every word. Her Mandarin was flawless, courtesy of a childhood split between Shanghai and San Francisco, and a linguistics degree from Columbia that now gathered dust in a box under her bed. But understanding and acknowledging were 2 different things. The tea was brewing when she heard the crash. She grabbed the pot anyway, still too hot to touch comfortably, and hurried back to find Richard Tan standing, his expensive charcoal suit sporting a dark stain across the sleeve. The teacup lay shattered on the floor, green liquid spreading across the tile like an accusation. "I barely touched it," one of the executives was saying. His face flushed. "The table? It's uneven. Doesn't matter." Richard's voice was cold, controlled. He looked at Lena as if seeing her for the first time and finding the view disappointing. Then, in rapid Mandarin, he muttered to his companions, "Ignorant ornament. Probably can't even spell her own name. This is what happens when restaurants hire decoration instead of competence." The words hung in the air like smoke. The dining room had gone quiet, that particular silence that happens when people sense conflict, but aren't sure if they should intervene or pretend not to notice. Lena felt heat crawl up her neck, a familiar burn that had nothing to do with the teapot still clutched in her hands. 3 years. 3 years of swallowing insults, of pretending not to understand, of making herself small and silent and safe. 3 years of hiding from a past that had chewed her up and spit her out, of building a life from the scraps of who she used to be. She set the teapot down with careful precision. "Sir," she said in flawless, unaccented Mandarin that cut through the room like crystal, "if you're going to insult someone's intelligence, you might want to learn proper pronunciation first. It's Zhuangxi Pin, not Zhuangxi Pin." Falling tone on the second character, not rising. But I suppose nuance isn't taught in boardrooms. The silence that followed was absolute. Richard Tan's face went through several colors in rapid succession: surprise, embarrassment, anger. The other executives stared at her with expressions ranging from shock to poorly concealed amusement. Somewhere near the kitchen, Miguel had his phone out. Recording. "You," Richard started, but Lena wasn't finished. "Your suit is Italian, not Chinese, so the tea won't stain permanently if you treat it within the hour. And the table wobbles because the floor is uneven, not because we're incompetent. But please, continue your dinner. I'll send someone else to assist you." She turned and walked back to the kitchen with her head high, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Behind her, she could hear the whispered explosion of conversation, the scrape of chairs, the hurried footsteps of Miguel trying to do damage control. She'd just ended her career of invisibility, and somewhere in her chest, beneath the fear and the shock and the adrenaline, she felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Alive. Lena's phone started buzzing at 6:47 a.m. She ignored it, pulling the thin blanket over her head in her studio apartment. Calling it a studio was generous. It was barely large enough for a bed and a hot plate, with a bathroom so small she had to sit sideways on the toilet. The building superintendent called it cozy. Lena called it survival. The buzzing didn't stop. By 7:15, she gave up on sleep and reached for her phone, squinting at the screen in the gray morning light filtering through her one window. 37 missed calls, 62 text messages. Her social media notifications had exceeded the counter's ability to display them numerically. Her stomach dropped. The first video she clicked on had been viewed 2.3 million times. The caption read, "Waitress destroys billionaire in his own language." She watched herself, tiny on the screen but somehow commanding correct Richard Tan's Mandarin pronunciation with surgical precision. The camera had caught every detail. The shock on the executives' faces, the way Richard's composure cracked like ice under pressure, the quiet devastation of a powerful man being humiliated by someone he'd considered beneath notice. The comments section was a war zone of opinions. Queen behavior. "This is what happens when you assume people are stupid." That pronunciation correction was brutal. "Someone find this woman and give her a better job." Lena's hands trembled as she scrolled. There were already think pieces being written, tweets from verified accounts, TikTok reactions from people she'd never met. Someone had identified Richard Tan and was posting screenshots of his company's stock price, down 3% since market open. Her phone rang again. This time she answered. "Lena, girl, you need to get down here." It was Sarah, her voice pitched high with barely contained hysteria. "There are reporters outside, actual reporters with cameras and everything. Miguel is losing his mind, and Mr. Chen." "I'm coming." Lena's voice sounded strange to her own ears, distant and hollow. She threw on yesterday's jeans and a clean sweater, pulled her hair into a bun without looking in the mirror, and stepped out into a world that had fundamentally changed overnight. Across the city, in a glass-walled office on the 47th floor, Richard Tan stood at his window and watched the morning sun fail to improve his mood. "The board wants a statement." His assistant, Jennifer, hovered near the door like she was afraid to get too close. "PR has drafted 3 versions. They're all garbage," Richard finished. He could see his reflection in the glass, superimposed over the city below. He looked tired. Worse, he looked old. "How bad?" "Trending #2 worldwide on Twitter. #1 in the US. Every major news outlet has picked it up. The Tonight Show made you the punchline in their monologue." Jennifer's voice was carefully neutral. "Your mother called. Twice." That made Richard close his eyes. His mother, Madame Hua Tan, who had fled Shanghai with nothing but her dignity, and built an empire through sheer force of will, who had taught him Mandarin by reading him Tang poetry before bed, who valued respect above profit, always. What did she say? She said, Jennifer checked her phone, reading the exact words, "You have brought shame not to yourself, but to the language of your ancestors. Call me when you remember how to pronounce apology." The pronunciation note hit like a blade between his ribs. "Get me everything on the waitress," Richard said quietly. "Name, background, education, everything." "Sir, if you're thinking of retaliating, I'm not." He turned to face Jennifer and saw her take an involuntary step back. He must have looked dangerous. "I'm thinking of understanding who just destroyed me in under 30 seconds, using nothing but grammar." Jennifer nodded and disappeared, leaving Richard alone with his reflection and his mistakes. The Golden Lotus was under siege. Lena arrived to find 3 news vans double-parked outside, their satellite dishes extended like flowers turning toward the sun. A cluster of people with phones and cameras crowded the entrance, and she recognized the aggressive friendliness of people who wanted something from her. Ms. Zhao, can you comment on what's your relationship with Richard Tan? Did you plan to confront him? She pushed through without answering, the bells above the door jingling with absurd cheerfulness as she entered. Inside, the diner was empty except for Miguel and Mr. Chen, the owner, who looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. Lena, Mr. Chen's voice was heavy. Sit down. She sat. You're a good worker. 3 years, never late, never complained. He wouldn't meet her eyes. But this attention, it's not good for business. People come here to eat, not to be on camera. I have to think about the other employees. You're firing me. It wasn't a question. I'm giving you 2 weeks' pay. He slid an envelope across the counter. And a good reference. You deserve that much. Lena took the envelope with numb fingers. Behind her, through the window, she could see someone setting up a professional camera. Her face would be on the evening news. Her name would be attached to this moment forever. The past she'd been running from for 3 years had finally caught up. Only now, it had an audience. Lena spent 2 days in her apartment watching her life become a meme. The video had spawned reaction videos, which had spawned commentary videos, which had spawned entire TikTok trends of people correcting pronunciation in increasingly creative ways. Someone had auto-tuned her Mandarin correction into a dance track. A late-night host had done a 10-minute segment. She was simultaneously a hero of the working class and a cautionary tale about respecting service workers, depending on which corner of the internet you occupied. Her phone never stopped ringing. Job offers from restaurants that wanted the publicity. Interview requests from podcasts she'd never heard of. A literary agent who wanted her to write a memoir about finding her voice. She ignored all of it. On the 3rd day, Richard Tan walked into the Golden Lotus. Lena was there collecting her final paycheck. Mr. Chen had insisted on handing it to her personally, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps to ensure she actually left. She was wearing civilian clothes, jeans and a sweater that had seen better years, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that exposed the exhaustion on her face. She looked up from signing paperwork, and there he was. He'd dressed down, relatively speaking. Dark jeans, a cashmere sweater, leather jacket that probably cost more than her security deposit. But it was his expression that caught her off guard. Uncertain, almost hesitant, like a man entering territory he didn't quite understand. The diner went silent again. Déjà vu hit like a wave. Ms. Zhao. His voice was careful, controlled. May I have a moment of your time? Mr. Chen practically materialized between them, his hands fluttering nervously. Mr. Tan, sir. I apologize for any. I'm not here about the incident. Richard's eyes never left Lena's face. I'm here to offer Ms. Zhao a job. Lena felt her stomach twist. I'm not interested in publicity stunts. Neither am I. He gestured toward an empty booth. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to walk out with what remained of her dignity intact. But there was something in his expression, not quite desperation, but close enough to intrigue her. And her bank account, currently sitting at $847 after 3 years of minimum wage plus tips, whispered different advice. She slid into the booth. He sat across from her, and she noticed the faint circles under his eyes, the slight disarray of hair that suggested he'd been running his hands through it. I need a linguistic consultant, he said without preamble. Temporary position, 3 months maximum. My company is finalizing a merger with Sinotrans, a Chinese-American logistics firm. The contract negotiations have been complicated. Lena's blood went cold at the name. Sinotrans. She knew that company. Knew it the way you knew the face of the person who destroyed your life. 3 years ago, she'd been a rising star at a consulting firm, tasked with translating merger documents for Sinotrans's acquisition of a smaller competitor. She'd found discrepancies, intentional mistranslations that would have cost the smaller firm millions. She'd reported them. And Michael Wong, Sinotrans's head of international operations, had buried her for it. You've gone pale. Richard's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. You know Sinotrans. It wasn't a question. Lena forced herself to breathe, to push the memories down where they'd been living for 3 years. I'm familiar with their reputation, which is why I need you. He leaned forward, and she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle that probably had a French name she couldn't pronounce. I've reviewed the contracts 3 times. Something feels wrong. but I can't identify what. Every translator I've hired says everything is perfect, but my instincts, your instincts don't trust perfection, Lena finished. She understood that feeling intimately. Exactly. His eyes locked on hers, and she saw intelligence there, calculation, but also something unexpected, vulnerability. I need someone who won't tell me what I want to hear. Someone who proved she's willing to speak truth, regardless of consequence. You mean someone foolish enough to correct a billionaire's grammar in public? I mean someone brave enough. He slid a folder across the table. The contract. Read it. If you find nothing wrong, I'll pay you $5,000 for your time. If you find what I suspect is there, the fee is $50,000 plus a consultant position for the duration of the merger. Lena's hand trembled slightly as she opened the folder. The first page was standard boilerplate, English and Mandarin in parallel columns, but her eyes caught on a name in the signature block. Michael Wong, Chief International Operations Officer, Sino-Trans. Her vision blurred at the edges. The man who'd systematically destroyed her career, who'd blacklisted her from every major firm in New York, who'd made sure her name was associated with fabricated claims and professional misconduct in every industry database that mattered. He was the mediator for this deal. I have 3 conditions, Lena heard herself say, her voice steadier than she felt. Complete autonomy in my analysis. Direct access to all documentation, no matter how sensitive. And if I find problems, you act on them, no matter who it implicates. Richard studied her face and she wondered what he saw there. Desperation. Determination. The ghost of who she used to be before she learned to make herself invisible. Agreed. He extended his hand across the table. Partners? Lena looked at his hand. Manicured nails, expensive watch, the physical manifestation of everything she'd lost. Behind him, through the window, she could see the reporters had finally dispersed. Her 15 minutes of viral fame were ending. But this was something else. This was a chance to face the man who'd ruined her, to prove she'd been right all along, to stop being invisible not because of a viral moment, but because of the truth. She shook his hand. His grip was firm, confident. Partners, she agreed, but I'm driving my own car to your office, and I'm keeping my own copy of everything. Something like respect flickered across his features. I wouldn't expect anything less. The Tan Industries building was everything Lena remembered the corporate world to be. Glass and steel, and the particular silence that came from expensive carpeting and central air conditioning. She'd worn her one good blazer, bought 3 years ago for interviews that never materialized, and felt like an imposter the moment she stepped through the revolving doors. Richard's assistant, Jennifer, met her in the lobby with a visitor badge and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Mr. Tan is already in the conference room. The Sino-Trans team arrived early. Of course they did. Michael Wong had always been aggressively punctual, wielding his respect for other people's time like a weapon to expose anyone who dared show up at 9:01 instead of 8:59. The conference room was on the 32nd floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that turned Manhattan into a postcard. 8 people sat around a table designed for 12, laptops open, coffee cups strategically placed. Richard sat at the head, and even seated he commanded the space. And there, 3 seats down, was Michael Wong. He'd aged well, 42 now, with distinguished gray at his temples that made him look trustworthy instead of old. His suit was Armani. His smile was practiced, and his eyes were the same cold calculation she remembered from the day he'd stood in HR and called her a liar. Those eyes landed on her as she entered. She watched the recognition hit him, watched his smile falter for just a fraction of a second before professional composure locked it back in place. But his hand tightened around his coffee cup, a tell she remembered from depositions and meetings, the only outward sign that Michael Wong was ever anything less than perfectly controlled. Ms. Zhao. Richard stood, gesturing to the empty seat beside him. Thank you for joining us. Everyone, this is Lena Zhao, our linguistic consultant for the merger. She'll be reviewing all documentation to ensure accuracy and cultural clarity. Ms. Zhao! Michael's voice was smooth as silk, pleasant as poison. What a surprise. I didn't realize you'd returned to corporate consulting. I didn't realize you'd gained the authority to care about my career trajectory, Mr. Wong. Lena's smile was equally pleasant, equally false. She set her briefcase down with deliberate care. But I suppose we all make surprising career moves. How is Vertex Logistics doing these days? Still dealing with that class action lawsuit from the botched acquisition? The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Richard's eyes moved between them, sharp and assessing. You two know each other. We've met. Michael's tone suggested the acquaintance was barely worth mentioning. Briefly, years ago. I'm sure Ms. Zhao has learned a great deal since then. I've learned that the truth tends to surface eventually, Lena replied, no matter how deeply someone tries to bury it. Fascinating. Richard's voice cut through the tension like a scalpel. Perhaps we should begin with the contract review. Ms. Zhao, you have the documents? Lena opened her briefcase and extracted the contract, all 247 pages of it, which she'd spent the previous 2 nights dissecting line by line. She'd found the discrepancies within the first 50 pages. Small things, easily missed unless you knew what to look for. A mistranslation here that shifted liability. An ambiguous pronoun there that changed the meaning of an entire clause. The same techniques she'd found 3 years ago. The same techniques that had destroyed her career when she'd dared to expose them. Section 7, paragraph 12. She began, her voice steady. The English version states that Tan Industries assumes operational control upon completion of the merger. The Mandarin translation says, after completion of merger obligations, a difference of potentially months in actual transfer of control. One of the Sinotrans executives shifted uncomfortably. Michael's expression never changed. Additionally, the liability clauses. Ms. Zhao. Michael's interruption was smooth, practiced. I appreciate your thoroughness, but these are standard linguistic variations in international contracts. Every translator we've consulted has confirmed. Every translator who wants to be hired again. Lena finished. She opened her laptop and turned it so the screen faced the table. I've created a side-by-side comparison of the discrepancies. 63 instances where the Mandarin version subtly shifts advantage towards Sinotrans. Individually, they seem like minor translation choices. Collectively, they represent a systematic attempt to manipulate the terms. The room was silent. Richard stood and circled the table to look at her screen. She watched his jaw tighten as he scrolled through her analysis. When he looked up, his eyes had gone cold in a way that made her understand how he'd built an empire before age 35. Mr. Wong. His voice was dangerously quiet. Would you care to explain this? I'd be careful about making accusations based on the analysis of a disgraced consultant with a personal vendetta. Michael's smile never wavered, but Lena saw his hand tighten again around his cup. Ms. Zhao's last position ended when she fabricated similar claims about contract irregularities. A pattern of behavior, perhaps, or a pattern of being right. Lena met his eyes directly. Tell them about the settlement, Michael. Tell them how Vertex Logistics paid $47 million to resolve those fabricated claims, quietly, without admission of guilt, buried in a footnote of their quarterly earnings report. Michael's mask cracked. Just for a second, but it was enough. The meeting ended with the kind of cold professionalism that preceded lawsuits. Richard announced a 48-hour pause on all merger proceedings pending independent review of the contracts. Michael Wong left with his team, his smile perfectly intact, his goodbyes perfectly courteous. Lena knew that smile. It was the same one he'd worn the day before he'd destroyed her. You have history with him. Richard stood at the window after everyone had left, his reflection ghostly in the glass. More than you said. 3 years ago, I was hired to review merger documents for Sinotrans. I found discrepancies. Wong made sure I'd never work in corporate consulting again. Lena gathered her papers with careful precision, keeping her hands busy so they wouldn't shake. He's very good at making the truth look like lies, and lies look like professional opinion. Can you prove what he did to you? If I could prove it, I wouldn't have spent 3 years serving tea. The bitterness in her voice surprised her. He buried everything. Made me look incompetent, vindictive, unstable. By the time I understood what was happening, every firm in Manhattan had a file on me marked liability. Richard turned to face her. But you kept the documentation. It wasn't a question. He'd already figured her out, the way she'd kept copies of everything. The worn flash drive she carried on her keychain like a talisman. The careful paranoia of someone who'd learned that truth without evidence was just noise. Always, she said simply. Good. He moved to his desk, pulled out a business card, wrote something on the back. This is my personal cell. If Wong makes any moves against you, he already is. Lena's phone had been buzzing intermittently throughout the meeting. She pulled it out now, scrolled through the notifications. Anonymous emails to her inbox. Social media accounts tagging her in posts about corporate espionage. A LinkedIn message from someone claiming to be a recruiter, but asking oddly specific questions about her employment history. Richard's jaw tightened. He's building a narrative. He's very good at that too. The attack came faster than she expected. By the next morning, Richard's board had received an anonymous dossier. 50 pages of carefully compiled evidence suggesting Lina Zhao was a corporate spy who'd infiltrated Tan Industries to sabotage the Sinotrans merger. Screenshots of emails she'd never sent. Bank records showing deposits she'd never received. Testimony from former colleagues she'd never met. It was masterful, comprehensive, almost believable. The board demanded an emergency meeting. Lina sat in a different conference room this time, smaller and colder, facing 8 board members whose expressions ranged from suspicious to openly hostile. Richard sat at the head of the table, his face carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. Ms. Zhao, the CFO, a woman named Patricia Chen with steel-gray hair and sharper eyes, slid a folder across the table. "Can you explain these communications?" Lina opened it. Email chains showing her coordinating with competitors. Financial records suggesting she'd been paid by 3 different firms to provide insider information. A signed statement from someone claiming to be her former supervisor at her old consulting firm, detailing a pattern of unethical behavior. Her hands trembled as she read. The forgeries were good, not perfect, but good enough to create doubt, and doubt was all Michael Wong needed. "These are fabricated." Her voice sounded thin even to her own ears. "I've never communicated with any of these companies. The financial records are falsified, and the supervisor," she pointed to the signature, "died 2 years ago. I went to her funeral." "Convenient," one of the board members muttered. "Mr. Tan." Patricia's voice was firm. "With respect, you hired this woman after a viral incident that embarrassed you publicly. The optics alone are problematic." "Now we have evidence, alleged evidence," Richard interrupted, "suggesting she's been working against our interests from the beginning." Patricia's expression was sympathetic, but implacable. "We need to protect the company. The merger represents $340 million in value. We can't let personal feelings compromise due diligence." "Personal feelings?" Richard's voice went cold. "I hired Ms. Zhao because she found 63 contractual discrepancies that could have cost us millions. Discrepancies that, notably, benefit Michael Wong's company exclusively. Or," another board member said carefully, "she created those discrepancies to justify her presence and make Wong look guilty. A classic infiltration tactic." Lina felt the walls closing in. The same suffocation she'd felt 3 years ago, watching her career dissolve while people who'd never met her decided she was a liar. The same helplessness of knowing the truth but being unable to prove it fast enough. "I think Ms. Zhao should be escorted from the building." Patricia's tone suggested the discussion was over. "Pending full investigation, of course. Mr. Tan, I understand this is difficult, but—" "Get out!" Lina's voice cut through the room like broken glass. She stood, gathering the forged documents with hands that had stopped shaking. Something had shifted inside her. The part that had learned to be small and quiet and invisible had finally, irrevocably, broken. "You want me gone? Fine. But before I go, understand this. Michael Wong has been manipulating international contracts for at least 5 years. He's cost companies hundreds of millions through deliberate mistranslations, and he destroys anyone who gets close to exposing him." She looked directly at Richard. 3 years ago, I had documentation. I had proof. I went through proper channels. And I lost everything because people like you," her gaze swept the board, "chose to believe that truth was less convenient than silence." She walked to the door, then paused. "When this merger collapses and you're explaining to shareholders why you lost $340 million, remember this moment. Remember that you had someone willing to fight for you, and you chose the comfortable lie instead." The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like finality. Richard sat in the empty conference room for 20 minutes after Lina left, staring at the forged documents spread across the table like accusatory fingers. His board had voted 7-1 to terminate her consultancy immediately. The single dissenting vote had been his own. Patricia had looked at him with something uncomfortably close to pity and said, "You're too close to this, Richard. Let us handle it." Too close to what? The truth? Due diligence? Or was he too close to the waitress who'd humiliated him, and everyone assumed his judgment was compromised by ego or attraction or some other weakness they could understand? His phone buzzed. Jennifer, his assistant. "Security reports Ms. Zhao left the building. Media is asking for statement." Of course the media knew. Michael Wong was thorough. Richard opened his laptop and pulled up the dossier again. 50 pages of damning evidence. He read it slowly this time, not looking for what was there, but for what wasn't. The gaps, the too perfect timing, the convenient way every piece of evidence aligned with a single narrative. He'd built a company by trusting his instincts. Those instincts had kept him alive in business while smoother, more educated competitors had failed. And every instinct he had was screaming that something was wrong. His office door opened without a knock, a privilege only one person possessed. Mother. Madame Huatan moved through his office like she owned it, which technically she did. At 72, she was small and elegant, dressed in a silk qipao that probably cost more than most people's cars. But it was her eyes that commanded attention. Dark, sharp, missing nothing. "You look terrible," she said in Mandarin, settling into the chair across from his desk without invitation. "Board meeting." Richard rubbed his face. "Complicated." "The waitress?" It wasn't a question. His mother read business news the way some people read novels. "They fired her." The board felt safe. Madame Hua's voice cut like a knife. "You felt?" Richard met his mother's gaze. She'd built her first business in a Shanghai apartment with no electricity, had survived the Cultural Revolution by being smarter and tougher than everyone around her. She'd taught him that the truth was worth more than comfort, that respect was earned through integrity, not power. He'd forgotten that lesson 3 days ago in a diner. He was forgetting it again now. "I don't know what I feel." The admission tasted like failure. "Then perhaps you should stop feeling and start thinking." She pulled out her phone, a recent concession to modernity, and scrolled through something. "This Michael Wong, I know of him." Richard straightened. "You do?" "I know of many people." She turned the phone toward him. "A Chinese business article, dated 8 months ago, with Michael Wong's picture. His company has settled 3 lawsuits in the past 2 years, all quietly, all involving contractual misunderstandings with international partners. The pattern is there if you bother to look. Why didn't you mention this before?" "Because you didn't ask. You were too busy being embarrassed by a waitress to do proper research on your business partner." She set her phone down with deliberate care. "Your father made the same mistake. He trusted reputation over investigation. It cost him everything." The words hit like a physical blow. Richard's father had died when Richard was 19. His business empire collapsed around him because he'd trusted a partner who'd systematically looted the company. Richard had sworn he'd never make the same mistake. And here he was, 3 days from signing a $340 million merger with a man whose past was scattered with the bodies of betrayed partners. The waitress found 63 discrepancies. Madame Hua continued. 63. Do you know how unlikely it is that 63 translation errors all favor the same party? Do you understand probability? She could have fabricated. Oh, please. His mother's scorn was withering. You humiliated her in public. She corrected your grammar and walked away. If she wanted revenge, she could have sold her story to any number of media outlets for far more than you're paying her. Instead, she came to work for you when you asked, and you repaid that trust by letting your board call her a liar. Richard's chest felt tight. The evidence can be investigated, should be investigated, will you? She stood, smoothing her dress. Or will you choose the comfortable lie, as your father did? She walked to the door, then paused. That waitress spoke truth when it cost her everything. She did it again today. How many times must she prove herself before you show the courage to believe her? The door closed softly. Richard sat in silence, his mother's words echoing in his ears. Then he opened his laptop and began pulling up everything he could find on Michael Wong, Sinotrans, and the 3 settlements his mother had mentioned. 2 hours later, he reached for his phone and called his head of security. I need you to do something, he said, and it needs to be very, very quiet. Lena sat in her apartment with the curtains drawn, her laptop open, and 3 years of carefully hoarded documentation spread across her bed, like evidence at a crime scene. Bank statements proving she'd never received the payments the forged documents claimed. Email headers showing the communications with competitors had been backdated and sent from IP addresses in Shanghai, places she'd never been. Screenshots of LinkedIn profiles for the former colleagues who'd given statements against her, all created within the last 72 hours. She'd spent 3 years preparing for this moment, hoping it would never come. Now that it had, she felt strangely calm. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. But something, instinct, desperation, The same reckless impulse that had made her correct a billionaire's grammar made her swipe to accept. Ms. Zhao. The voice was male, unfamiliar, professionally neutral. My name is Diego Martinez. I'm an investigative journalist with the Financial Observer. I'd like to talk to you about Michael Wong. Lena's breath caught. How did you get this number? I've been investigating Sinotrans for 18 months. Your name came up in my research 3 years ago, connected to allegations of contract fraud that mysteriously disappeared. A pause. And then yesterday, I received an interesting anonymous tip about forged documents being used to discredit you. Again, who sent the tip? Someone who signs his emails, a concerned party, and uses an encrypted server. But the documents he sent match the ones currently being circulated about you. Original versions, before they were doctored. Lena's hand tightened on the phone. Why are you calling me? Because I think you have pieces of a puzzle I've been trying to solve for over a year. And I think someone with significant resources just decided to help us both. Diego's voice shifted, became more urgent. Ms. Zhao, I have evidence of at least 7 international companies that lost money through Sinotrans contracts. Mistranslations, liability shifts, timing discrepancies. Always subtle, always deniable. But the pattern is clear once you know what to look for. Why hasn't anyone exposed him? Because Michael Wong is very good at making whistleblowers look crazy. He destroys credibility before anyone can build a case. You know this better than anyone. A pause. But if we work together, if we can connect your documentation to my investigation, we might actually have enough to make this stick. Lena walked to her window, pulling back the curtain to look at the city below. Somewhere out there, Michael Wong was sleeping comfortably, confident that he'd neutralized another threat. Somewhere, Richard Tan was probably regretting ever walking into a diner in Chinatown, and somewhere, someone had sent her documentation to a journalist capable of actually using it. Tell me what you need, she said. So the meeting happened in a coffee shop in Brooklyn, far from Manhattan's corporate towers and prying eyes. Diego Martinez turned out to be 40-something with tired eyes and ink-stained fingers, the kind of journalist who still took notes by hand because he didn't trust technology. He spread his investigation across a corner table like a map to buried treasure. Wong's pattern goes back at least 7 years, Diego explained, his finger tracing connections between companies. He joins a firm, identifies a lucrative international merger, subtly manipulates the contracts, then moves to the next position before consequences catch up. By the time companies realize they've been defrauded, he's gone and the contracts are so complex that proving intentional manipulation is nearly impossible. Except I proved it 3 years ago. Lena pulled out her flash drive. Every discrepancy, documented. Every mistranslation, highlighted. Every financial impact, calculated. Diego's eyes widened as he scrolled through her files. This is comprehensive. I was thorough. It didn't matter. The bitterness in her voice surprised her. No one wanted to believe a junior consultant over a respected executive. They will now. Diego looked up. Because you're not alone anymore. I have 6 other victims willing to testify. I have financial records showing Wong's compensation mysteriously increased after every successful merger. And now I have your documentation proving methodical fraud. It's still not enough. A new voice cut into their conversation. Both of them looked up to find Richard Tan standing beside their table, dressed in jeans and a baseball cap like he was trying to be incognito. It wasn't working. You couldn't disguise the particular confidence that came from having multiple zeros in your bank account. Mr. Tan, Lena's voice was cold. Come to fire me again? I never fired you. The board did. He pulled out a chair without invitation and sat. I spent the last 3 days having my security team trace every piece of evidence used against you. Every forged email originated from the same server cluster in Shanghai that Wong has used for at least 4 other character assassinations. Every fake financial record was created using the same accounting software template. He's not just methodical, he's lazy. Diego was already typing. Can you prove that? I can prove it. I can testify to it, and I can provide something else. Richard pulled out his phone, opened a file, and turned it toward them. Audio recording from a Sinotrans board meeting 6 months ago. Wong discussing creative contract interpretation with his CFO. My head of security found it buried in their server. Apparently they were sloppy about digital hygiene. Lena listened to the recording. Michael's voice, unmistakable. discussing how to maximize advantage through strategic ambiguity in translation, talking about how American companies were too trusting and too lazy to verify Chinese translations thoroughly. It was damning. It was perfect. It was everything she'd needed 3 years ago. Why are you helping me? The question came out before she could stop it. Your board made it clear. My board was wrong. I was wrong. Richard met her eyes directly. You spoke truth at great personal cost. Twice. I repaid that by doubting you when it mattered most. That ends now. Diego looked between them, a smile playing at his lips. So we have documentation, testimony, audio evidence, and a billionaire willing to go on record. Wong won't be able to discredit all of us. He'll try. Lena knew Michael too well. He'll lawyer up, claim the audio is fabricated, attack our credibility. Let him try. Richard's voice had gone cold, the tone of a man who'd decided something and wouldn't be moved. I'm calling a press conference, 3 days from now. We expose everything publicly, all at once, before he has time to build a defense. That's risky, Diego warned. If we don't have every detail perfect, then we have 3 days to make it perfect. Richard stood. Ms. Zhao, I'd like to formally reinstate your consultancy, with a significant raise and a public apology from the board. Will you help me destroy the man who tried to destroy both of us? Lena looked at the evidence spread across the table. 3 years of her life, condensed into documents and audio files. 3 years of invisibility, about to become the opposite. She thought about the girl she'd been, the consultant who'd believed truth mattered more than politics, the woman she'd become, serving tea and swallowing pride, and the person she might be if she had the courage to try one more time. Yes, she said. But I have one condition. Name it. When this is over, when we've exposed Wong and cleaned up your merger, I want the truth told about what happened 3 years ago. Full exoneration. My name cleared in every database, every blacklist, every whispered conversation in every corporate HR department in this city. Richard extended his hand. You have my word. This time, when Lena shook it, it felt like a promise instead of a transaction. The Empire Hotel's grand ballroom could hold 500 people. By 2 p.m. on the day of the press conference, it held 600 and counting, with overflow crowds in the lobby watching on monitors. Every major news outlet had sent reporters. Financial channels had interrupted regular programming. Social media was ablaze with speculation. The viral waitress who'd humiliated a billionaire was about to speak publicly, this time with that same billionaire standing beside her. The narrative possibilities were infinite. Backstage, Lena adjusted her blazer for the 3rd time. She'd bought it yesterday, navy blue, professional, armor disguised as business wear. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice, when she practiced her opening lines, was steady. You don't have to do this. Richard appeared beside her, dressed in a dark suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent used to be. I can handle the announcement. You can stay behind the scenes. I've been behind the scenes for 3 years. Lena met his eyes. I'm done being invisible. Something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. Then let's make sure they never forget your name again. Diego was already on stage, setting up his laptop and documents with the precision of someone who'd waited 18 months for this moment. The evidence was organized, cross-referenced, damning. They'd spent 72 hours turning scattered pieces into an undeniable narrative. Michael Wong sat in the 3rd row, flanked by 4 lawyers and wearing an expression of amused contempt. He'd shown up 30 minutes early, a power move designed to show he wasn't afraid. But Lena noticed his hand kept moving to his phone, checking something, waiting. He was confident. He shouldn't be. At exactly 2 p.m., Richard walked on stage. The crowd quieted instantly. Say what you would about him. But the man commanded attention. Thank you for coming. His voice carried across the ballroom without strain. 3 weeks ago, I made a mistake. I humiliated someone in public because I assumed she was beneath my notice. What I didn't know was that the woman I insulted was one of the most talented linguistic consultants in this city, whose career had been systematically destroyed for having the courage to expose corporate fraud. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cameras swiveled toward Lena in the wings. Today, I'm here to correct multiple mistakes. Mine, my company's, and the industry's. Richard gestured toward the screen behind him. Ms. Lena Zhao, please join me. Lena walked on stage. The lights were blinding, the crowd a blur of faces and cameras. She found Michael in the 3rd row and locked eyes with him. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't the one looking away. 3 years ago, I discovered evidence of systematic contract fraud, she began, Her voice amplified across the ballroom. I reported it through proper channels. I was thorough, professional, and completely certain of my findings. And for my trouble, I was blacklisted, discredited, and forced to start my life over serving tables. She pulled out the first document, her original report from 3 years ago, the one that had been lost by her former employer. This is what I found then. 63 contractual discrepancies in merger documents, all favoring one party, all subtle enough to be dismissed as translation nuances. The man responsible for those manipulations is sitting in this room today. Michael's lawyers leaned in, whispering urgently. Michael himself remained still, that slight smile never wavering. Recently, I found the exact same patterns in a new merger, $340 million being transferred, contracts riddled with the same translation errors, the same liability shifts, the same timing manipulations. And when I exposed it, the same man tried to destroy me again using forged documents and fabricated evidence. Diego stepped forward with a laptop. We've compiled evidence spanning 7 years, 11 companies, and approximately $800 million in fraudulent contracts. The pattern is undeniable. The methodology is consistent. And the architect of all of it is Michael Wong, currently serving as Chief International Operations Officer for Sinotrans. The screen behind them filled with documents, timelines, financial records. Every company Michael had worked for, every merger he'd touched, every victim who'd been too afraid or too defeated to fight back. This is an elaborate fabrication. Michael's voice cut through the room. He stood, his lawyers grabbing at his sleeves, trying to pull him back down. But his ego wouldn't let him sit while being accused. Ms. Zhao has a history of making false accusations. This is a vindictive attack. This is a confession. Richard pressed a button. Michael's voice filled the ballroom. The recording from the Sinotrans board meeting, crystal clear, undeniably him, discussing strategic ambiguity in translation and maximizing advantage through American companies' laziness. The room exploded. Reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, Michael's lawyers physically restraining him from approaching the stage. And through it all, Lena stood in the lights, no longer invisible, no longer silent, watching 3 years of injustice finally being answered. We've submitted all evidence to the SEC, the FBI, and relevant international authorities, Diego announced over the chaos. Criminal and civil investigations are already underway. Security was moving toward Michael now, not hotel security, federal agents who'd been waiting in the wings. Lena watched them approach him, watched the realization finally crack through his composure, watched him understand that this time, his lawyers and his charm and his reputation wouldn't be enough. Richard stepped closer to her, his voice low enough that only she could hear. You did it. We did it. She corrected. The agents reached Michael. She heard him start to argue, to threaten, to demand they know who they were dealing with. His voice faded as they escorted him toward the exit, past 600 witnesses, past cameras broadcasting to millions. Lena closed her eyes and felt the weight of 3 years lift from her shoulders like wings she'd forgotten she had. The world didn't change overnight, but it changed fast enough to feel like it did. By 6 p.m., Waitress Exposes Billionaire Fraud was trending in 47 countries. By midnight, 3 more victims had come forward with evidence of Michael Wong's manipulations. By morning, Sinotrans's stock had plummeted 34%. Their board had issued a statement denouncing Wong and suspending all international operations pending investigation, and Lena's phone had more missed calls than her battery could display. She turned it off and sat in Richard's office. He'd insisted she stay there rather than return to her studio apartment, which was currently surrounded by reporters, watching the news coverage with a sort of detached surrealism. Former consultant Lena Zhao, who first attempted to expose these crimes 3 years ago, has been vindicated, the anchor was saying, over footage of Lena on stage, documents in hand, voice steady. She looked powerful on camera, confident. Nothing like the woman who'd served tea with her eyes downcast. You should eat something. Richard appeared with takeout containers from somewhere, probably sent by his assistant, who seemed capable of manifesting anything on demand. You haven't eaten since breakfast. I'm not hungry. But she took the container anyway, because her hands needed something to do. Have you heard anything about Wong? Federal custody. No bail. Apparently he tried to book a flight to Shanghai within 30 minutes of leaving the press conference. Richard settled into the chair across from her. His lawyers are already negotiating a plea deal. The evidence is too comprehensive to fight. Lena should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt hollow, like she'd been holding her breath for 3 years, and now that she could finally exhale, she'd forgotten how. The board wants to make a public apology, Richard continued. Tomorrow at a shareholders meeting, they'd like you to be there. So they can apologize for calling me a liar in front of cameras? Lena's laugh was bitter. How generous. So they can begin making amends for failing you. It's not enough, nothing will be enough, but it's a start. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Lena, you were right 3 years ago. You were right last week. You've been right every single time, and the people who should have believed you didn't. That's on us. On me. You didn't know me 3 years ago. No, but I knew you last week, and I still chose the comfortable lie over the uncomfortable truth. I let my board intimidate me into doubting someone who'd proven herself multiple times. His voice was quiet, sincere in a way that made her chest ache. I'm sorry, genuinely, deeply sorry, and I know that doesn't fix what happened, but it's a start, Lena finished softly. They sat in silence for a moment, the city lights twinkling through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Somewhere out there, Michael Wong was in a cell. Somewhere, victims were finally being heard. And somewhere, a junior consultant who'd been erased 3 years ago was being written back into existence. The media is calling you a hero, Richard said. I'm not a hero. I just refuse to stay quiet. Lena set down her untouched food. Do you know how many times I almost gave up? How many mornings I woke up and thought about just disappearing, changing my name, moving to a different city, accepting that some battles can't be won. But you didn't, because I was angry. The admission felt like lancing a wound. I've been so angry for 3 years. At Wong, at the system, at myself for not being better at fighting back. That anger kept me alive, but it also kept me small, scared, invisible. You're not invisible anymore. Lena laughed, the sound sharper than she intended. No, now I'm a symbol, the waitress who fought back, the underdog who won. Do you know what that means? It means I'll never just be Lena Zhao again. I'll always be the story. Would you rather go back to being invisible? The question hung in the air between them. Lena thought about the golden lotus, the smell of grease and tea, the weight of an apron, and the practiced smile she'd worn like armor. She thought about 3 years of making herself small, of swallowing words, of existing in the spaces between other people's notice. No, she said finally, but I'd like to choose who I become next, not have it chosen for me by headlines and hashtags. Richard nodded slowly. Then choose. What do you want, Lena? Not what you think you should want, not what makes for a good story. What do you actually want? The question was simple. The answer wasn't. I want to matter, she said quietly. Not as a viral moment or a cautionary tale. I want to do work that means something. I want to use my skills to help people who can't fight back against the Michael Wongs of the world. I want to build something that lasts longer than a news cycle. Then let's build it. Richard's voice was certain, no hesitation. You have expertise that's now been validated by international media. You have credibility that companies would pay millions for. You have a platform. Use it. To do what? Whatever you want. He smiled, and for the first time since she'd met him, it reached his eyes. Start a consultancy, an ethics organization, a watchdog group, or come work for me permanently, not as a temporary consultant, but as a partner. Help me make sure Tan Industries never makes the mistakes with you that we made with Wong. Lena's breath caught. You're offering me a partnership. I'm offering you a choice. And whatever you choose, you'll have my support, financial, professional, whatever you need. He stood, moved to the window. You saved my company from a $340 million fraud. You exposed a criminal who'd been operating freely for 7 years. You did all of that while people were actively trying to destroy you. If that doesn't earn partnership, nothing does. The offer was generous. More than generous. It was everything the girl she'd been 3 years ago had dreamed of. But Lena wasn't that girl anymore. I need time to think, she said finally. This is all happening so fast, and I've spent 3 years barely surviving. I need to figure out who I am when I'm not just fighting to prove I'm not a liar. Take all the time you need. Richard turned back to face her. But Lena, you were never just fighting to prove you weren't a liar. You were fighting because you believe truth matters more than convenience. That's rare. Don't lose that. 3 months later, Lena stood in front of a building in Brooklyn that had once been a textile factory and was now, according to the deed in her briefcase, hers. The Zhao Institute for Linguistic Ethics and Corporate Accountability. The name was a mouthful. Diego had told her to shorten it. Richard had offered to hire a branding consultant. Madame Hua had simply said, "Names should say exactly what they mean. This does." Lena had kept it. The building was 3 stories of brick and enormous windows, with enough space for offices, classrooms, and a research library. It needed work. The heating was temperamental. The second floor had water damage, and someone had spray-painted something incomprehensible on the loading dock, but it had good bones. Like her, it was a work in progress. "You're sure about this?" Richard appeared beside her, carrying 2 coffee cups from the shop across the street. He'd been doing that a lot lately, showing up unannounced with coffee, with advice, with his presence. She should probably tell him to stop, but she'd discovered she didn't want to. "I'm terrified," Lena admitted, taking the coffee. "I've never run anything before. I've never managed people or built programs or dealt with donors. What if I fail?" "Then you fail." His voice was matter-of-fact. "And then you get up and try again because that's what you do. You failed before, been knocked down hard, and you're still here. That's supposed to be encouraging? It's supposed to be honest." He smiled. "You don't need platitudes, Lena. You need truth. And the truth is that you're about to do something incredibly difficult that most people wouldn't have the courage to attempt. You might fail. You also might change the entire industry. Either way, you'll have tried, which is more than most people can say." Lena looked up at the building, imagining what it could become. She'd spent the last 3 months planning. Curriculum for training translators in ethical practices, consulting services for companies that wanted truly independent contract review, a legal fund for whistleblowers who needed support fighting back against retaliation. The initial funding had come from multiple sources. Richard had donated anonymously, though she'd figured it out immediately because the amount was suspiciously generous, and the wire transfer had come from a firm his mother owned. Diego had helped organize a crowdfunding campaign that had raised $200,000 in 2 weeks. And 6 of the victims from Michael Wong's schemes had contributed, wanting to turn their losses into something constructive. "I hired my first employee yesterday," Lena said. "Maria Chen. She was working as a paralegal, but she has a linguistics degree from Berkeley, and she went through something similar to what I did. Reported fraud, got blacklisted, spent 5 years rebuilding." "How many employees are you planning to start with?" 5, maybe 6. All people who've been through corporate retaliation for speaking truth. All people who understand that this work isn't just academic, it's personal." She took a sip of coffee, the warmth spreading through her chest. "I want to build something for people like us. People who tried to do the right thing and paid for it." Richard was quiet for a moment, studying her face. "You've changed." "I've had to." Lena met his gaze. 3 months ago, I was still operating from a place of fear and anger. Now I'm trying to operate from purpose. It's harder than I expected." "How so?" "Because anger is easy. Anger tells you exactly who your enemies are and what you're fighting against. Purpose is more complicated. It requires figuring out what you're fighting for. And that's scarier, because it means you might actually succeed, and then you have to live up to what you've built. You will." His certainty was unshakable. "You don't know that. I know you." He said it simply, like it was obvious, like 3 months had been enough time to understand someone completely. Maybe it had been. Trauma and triumph had a way of compressing time, making connections form faster and deeper than normal circumstances allowed. Lena's phone buzzed. A message from Madame Hua. "The bonsai tree I promised arrives tomorrow, for the lobby. May your roots grow deep and your branches reach far." She smiled, something warm unfurling in her chest. Richard's mother had become an unexpected ally, visiting the institute, introducing Lena to potential donors, offering advice in the form of aphorisms that were somehow both cryptic and perfectly clear. "Your mother sent a bonsai for the lobby." "Of course she did." Richard's expression was fond. "She collects people the way some people collect art. And once you're in her collection, she's loyal for life." "Is that what I am? Part of her collection?" "You're part of our lives." He said it casually, but there was weight behind the words. "Mother's, mine. You've become someone we care about. I hope that's okay." Lena's breath caught. Somewhere in the past 3 months, between the press conferences and the planning meetings and the coffee deliveries, something had shifted between them. The dynamic of billionaire and consultant had dissolved into something more complicated, more real, something that felt dangerously close to friendship, or more. "It's okay," she said softly. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching construction workers unload materials for the renovations. The building was coming together slowly, piece by piece, just like her life. 3 months ago, she'd been a viral sensation, angry and vindicated, but lost. Now she was building something that mattered, creating space for others who'd been silenced, turning her worst experience into a foundation for change. It wasn't the career she'd planned at 25, but it was the one she needed at 28. "The grand opening is in 6 weeks, Lena said. "Will you come? Try to keep me away." The grand opening of the Zhao Institute was everything Lena had hoped for, and nothing she'd expected. 200 people filled the renovated space, former victims of corporate fraud, journalists, ethics professors, and a surprising number of corporate executives who'd read about her work and wanted to be on the right side of history. The bonsai from Madame Hua sat in the lobby, its ancient branches twisted into shapes that suggested both struggle and perseverance. Lena had given a speech. A good one, apparently. Diego told her afterward that he'd teared up, and he wasn't the crying type. She'd talked about truth and accountability and the cost of silence. She'd thanked everyone who'd helped her rebuild, and she'd promised that this institute would be a place where speaking up didn't mean losing everything. Now, hours later, the crowd had thinned to a handful of people. Maria was in the corner talking to a potential donor. Diego was interviewing one of the ethics professors for a follow-up piece, and Lena stood by the windows, watching the Brooklyn streets below and feeling the weight of accomplishment settle over her like a blanket. "Hiding from your own party?" Richard's voice was warm, amused. She turned to find him holding 2 glasses of champagne, still dressed in the dark suit he'd worn for the opening. He'd been there all day, not on stage, not giving speeches, just present in the way that mattered. Not hiding, breathing. She took the champagne. "It's been a long day. It's been a long 6 months." He moved to stand beside her at the window. "From a diner in Chinatown to this. That's quite a journey. We both made journeys." Lena sipped her champagne, feeling the bubbles fizz against her tongue. "You're not the same man who insulted my intelligence in Mandarin." "God, I hope not." He winced. That man was an arrogant ass who confused wealth with wisdom. And now I'm an arrogant ass who's learning to listen before he speaks. His smile was self-deprecating. "It's a work in progress." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights flicker on as dusk deepened into evening. Somewhere in the past 6 months, they developed a rhythm. Coffee meetings that turned into working lunches that turned into dinners that lingered until the restaurant started stacking chairs. Lena told herself it was professional collaboration, strategic partnership. 2 people who'd survived a crisis together and now had mutual interests to protect. She was lying to herself, and she knew it. "There's something I need to tell you," Richard said quietly. "I'm attracted to you. Have been since the press conference, maybe earlier. And I know the power dynamic is complicated and the timing might be wrong, and there are probably a dozen reasons why this is a terrible idea. But I'm tired of pretending I only care about you professionally." Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd suspected, maybe hoped, but hearing it said aloud was different, more real, more terrifying. "That's quite a confession," she managed. "I'm told honesty is important." His expression was vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. "You taught me that, among other things." "What other things?" "That respect isn't something you demand, it's something you earn. That truth matters more than convenience. That the people we dismiss might be the ones we most need to hear." He turned to face her fully. "That sometimes the universe puts someone in your life specifically to show you what an idiot you've been." Lena laughed, despite herself. "Is that what I am, your cosmic wake-up call? You're the woman I can't stop thinking about, the one who makes me want to be better, not because I'm trying to impress you, but because you make me believe I actually can be." He reached out, hesitated, then gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I know I have no right to ask for anything from you. I humiliated you, doubted you, failed you when you needed support, but if you're willing to give me a chance..." "In which language would you like to hear my answer?" Lena interrupted, her voice soft. Richard blinked. "What?" "You asked me something important. I'm asking which language you want the answer in. English? Mandarin? The language of corporate partnerships? Or something more honest?" Understanding dawned in his eyes. "The honest one. Always the honest one." Lena set down her champagne and took his face in her hands. "Then here's my honest answer. I'm terrified. You're a billionaire and I'm still figuring out how to run a nonprofit. You live in a world of board meetings and country clubs, and I'm still getting used to having health insurance. We started in the worst possible way, and there are probably 100 reasons this won't work. But," his voice was barely a whisper, "but somewhere between the press conference and the coffee deliveries and watching you actually apologize to people you'd wronged, I stopped seeing the arrogant billionaire and started seeing you, the person who admitted he was wrong, who used his resources to help expose fraud instead of covering it up, who shows up with coffee because he knows I forget to eat when I'm working." She smiled. "Who learned to pronounce apology correctly in Mandarin?" "I practiced," he admitted. "I know, your mother told me." Richard laughed, the sound surprised and genuine. Then his expression turned serious. "So is that a yes?" "It's a, let's try and see what happens." Lena's thumb traced his cheekbone. "But slowly and honestly. No games, no power dynamics, no pretending to be something we're not." "I can do that." He leaned closer, his forehead almost touching hers. "Slowly and honestly. Starting now. Starting now." He kissed her softly, carefully, like she was something precious that might break. And for the first time in 6 months, maybe 3 years, maybe her entire life, Lena felt completely, perfectly seen. When they broke apart, she was smiling. "You know people are staring. Let them stare." Richard pulled her closer. "I've learned that worrying about what people think is vastly overrated." Through the window, Brooklyn sparkled with 1,000 lights. The Institute's sign glowed in the darkness. Zhao Institute for Linguistic Ethics and Corporate Accountability. Her name, finally attached to something she'd built rather than something that had been done to her. "The life has an accent," Lena said softly. "But the truth is clear." "What does that mean?" "It means we all speak different languages: power, privilege, survival, hope. But truth transcends all of them. It's the one language everyone understands, if they're brave enough to listen." Richard kissed her forehead. "Teach me that language. The true one. I'm a slow learner, but I promise I'll pay attention." "Then lesson 1 starts now," Lena said, taking his hand. "Come on, we have a party to return to." They walked back into the crowded room together, and Lena felt the weight of the past finally lift. Not erased, it would always be part of her story, but transformed into something that strengthened rather than broke her. She'd started as invisible, became viral, and now, finally, she was simply herself. That was enough. 1 year later, the United Nations conference room was smaller than Lena had expected, but perhaps that made sense. Truth didn't need grand stages. It just needed people willing to listen. She stood at the podium, looking out at delegates from 47 countries, and felt a calm she'd earned through fire. The Zhao Institute had just been awarded the UN Ethics in Business Award, recognizing their first year of work. 17 whistleblowers supported, 5 major fraud cases exposed, 3 corporate policy changes implemented at Fortune 500 companies. More importantly, they'd created a blueprint. Other organizations were copying their model. Universities were adding their curriculum. The term Zhao Protocol had entered the corporate ethics lexicon. "Truth needs no translation," Lena said in English, then repeated it in Mandarin, Spanish, French, Arabic, Japanese, German, and Portuguese, each language earning nods from different sections of the audience. "It speaks the same in every tongue. What changes is our courage to voice it and our willingness to hear it." She paused, letting the words settle. "A year ago, I stood in a different room and exposed corporate fraud that had been operating freely for 7 years. People asked me why I didn't just stay quiet, accept my viral moment, and move on with my life. The answer is simple: because truth doesn't expire. Because injustice delayed is injustice multiplied. Because someone has to speak first, or no one ever will." In the third row, Richard sat beside his mother. Madame Hua wore traditional silk and a satisfied expression, the look of someone who'd orchestrated something without anyone quite realizing it. Richard caught Lena's eye and smiled, the private smile that was just for her. They'd been together for 8 months now. Slowly, as promised. Honestly, as required. He'd been teaching her about business strategy and investor relations. She'd been teaching him about ethical frameworks and institutional accountability. More importantly, they'd been teaching each other about trust. The Zhao Institute was built on a simple premise, Lena continued, that speaking truth shouldn't cost you everything, that we should protect whistleblowers instead of punishing them, that corporate accountability matters more than corporate comfort. She smiled. "We're not perfect. We make mistakes, but we try every day to be on the right side of history." Diego stood in the back, camera in hand, documenting everything. He'd won a Pulitzer 3 months ago for his Michael Wong investigation, a series that had sparked international regulatory reform and criminal prosecutions in 4 countries. Wong himself was serving 7 years in federal prison, with civil cases still pending that would likely take everything he'd ever made. Justice was slow, but it was thorough. In closing, I want to say this to everyone watching. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. And if speaking that truth costs you everything, there are people who will help you rebuild. The Zhao Institute is one of them. We are many others emerging around the world. You are not alone. The applause was thunderous. Afterward, in the reception area, Lena found herself surrounded by people wanting to shake her hand, thank her, tell her their stories. She listened to each one, storing their faces and words like precious documents. You were brilliant. Richard appeared with 2 glasses of wine, somehow navigating through the crowd without spilling either. I was terrified. You hid it well. He handed her a glass, then pulled an envelope from his jacket. This came today. I thought you'd want to see it. Lena opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter on expensive stationery. Ms. Zhao, I am writing from prison, which is where I belong. I spent 7 years building schemes and destroying people who threatened to expose me. You were the first one I tried to bury, and you were the only one who refused to stay buried. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that watching you build something constructive from the wreckage I created has been the only truly educational part of my incarceration. You could have spent your energy on revenge. Instead, you spent it on reconstruction. That takes a kind of courage I never possessed. Michael Wong. Lena read it twice, then carefully folded it back into the envelope. She felt nothing. No triumph, no anger, no vindication. Just a quiet acknowledgement that this chapter was finally, completely closed. Are you going to respond? Richard asked. No. Lena tucked the letter into her bag. He doesn't need my response. He needs to sit with what he's done. That's his work now, not mine. Madame Hua appeared, moving through the crowd like a silk-clad battleship. Lena, excellent speech. You made me cry during the Mandarin section. That was the goal, Lena teased. The older woman's eyes sparkled. I have someone for you to meet. A Chinese entrepreneur, very ethical, very concerned about contract transparency. She wants to fund a Zhao Institute branch in Shanghai. Mother, she just finished a speech. Richard started. The work doesn't stop because we're tired. Madame Hua interrupted. Lena understands this. Don't you? Lena looked at Richard, saw his concern mixed with understanding. Then she looked at the crowd of people still waiting to speak to her, each one carrying their own story of injustice and hope. I understand, she said. But first, I need 5 minutes with someone I love. Madame Hua's expression softened. 5 minutes. Then you save the world. Deal? Deal. Richard took Lena's hand and led her to a quiet corner, away from the crowd and cameras and expectations. Through the windows, New York glittered in the evening light, the city that had broken her and rebuilt her, that had witnessed her fall and her rise. Thank you, Richard said quietly. For what? For being patient with me, for teaching me that power without integrity is just noise, for showing me what real strength looks like. He cupped her face gently. For correcting my grammar in a diner and changing my entire life. Lena laughed, the sound lighter than she'd ever heard from herself. Best 350 cup of tea I ever spilled. Technically, I spilled it. Semantics. He kissed her then, soft and certain, and Lena tasted possibility. The future spreading out before them like an untranslated document, full of meaning they'd discover together. When they broke apart, Madame Hua was already waving her over. Work called. The world needed saving, one translated truth at a time. But first, this moment, this man, this proof that speaking truth could lead not just to justice, but to joy. Ready? Richard asked. Lena squeezed his hand. Always. They walked back into the crowd together. The waitress who'd become a whistleblower. The billionaire who'd learned to listen. 2 people who'd started with insults and ended with integrity. The universe had thrown them together in a diner in Chinatown. What they'd built since then was entirely their choice. And they chose truth. Always. End.